Sorry, I feel a burst of having to cough coming on. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to today's program on Exam Prep 101, Tips to Getting Prepared to Take Your Final Exam. This evening's discussion will focus on practical strategies for exam prep, stress management, and maintaining mental wellness during this demanding time of the year. During this live program, participants are welcome to post questions using the Q&A tab or chat function in the Zoom portal. You guys may begin.
Thanks, Amanda. So we'll get started here. I know it's a busy time of year. And Michael, thank you for taking the time. I know it's busy for you as well. So we'll get going here. We wanted to just offer this Exam Prep 101 program between myself and Michael Wetmore, who is a visiting assistant professor at Albany Law. And today like I said, we're going to do some exam prep, and our goal is to really have a more casual, authentic discussion about what it means to navigate the stressors in law school, and how we can approach exam season with confidence. So we're going to outline NYSSBA's Attorney Wellbeing Program, show some of the resources we have in-house here at the Bar Association, and then Michael and I will kind of discuss the meat and potatoes of what this actually means. What does it mean to find this balance while preparing for exams? And then if we have time, we have some additional practical tips we'll go over as well. But before we kind of get into that conversation, I just want to introduce kind of my role at the Bar Association. So we have a standing committee on attorney well-being, which was a result of the 2021 task force report on attorney well-being. And a lot of people aren't aware of this kind of program that we've developed since that task force report. So we have this standing committee. I'm not going to get too much into what they're working on within their subcommittees, but I just do want to highlight that we know it's a systemic issue, this high stress culture within the field of law. So we are looking at it from all perspectives. It's not a onus put on the individual to simply do self-care. It's something we're looking at really strategically from the top down as well. And we have these 6 subcommittees that are doing just that. But for supporting the individuals and for kind of supporting you all as you go into exam season, we have this attorney wellbeing program, and we're working on developing specialized programming, these signature workshops really tailored to the needs of our lawyers in New York. And we have some weekly programs, groups, CLEs, things like that. And we follow an 8-pillar model, which Michael said he was Googling today, not to throw you under the bus there, but it's not well known. So I don't want anyone to feel like they've missed something here with this fancy model. This is something we follow here. There's other dimensions that people look at, like 6 dimensions of wellness, but really it's just how we look at wellness from a holistic lens. So not just how to succeed in the field of law, but to succeed in a way that's meaningful, fulfilling, and personal. And also balance. So succeeding in the social aspect of your life, succeeding mentally, spiritually, emotionally, in addition to those occupational successes we're, of course, striving for. So we're almost getting into that conversation here about those stressors. And before we do, I just want to kind of throw out maybe an obvious analogy, the iceberg, but just empathizing that we'd never know what's going on below the surface here. So in addition to preparing for exams, we're also, navigating these personal obstacles. There's stuff going on in the world that we're seeing, and lawyers are really kind of expected to put all that on the back burner. And law students really have to kind of live, with these blinders on, especially during this time of year. So we just empathize that everyone's trying to survive so much of what's going on around them, as well as, the law school stressors themselves. So I kind of wanted to start the conversation here, Michael, if that's okay. Could you tell me a little bit about yourself and how you kind of got, I know you're an assisting law professor, but kind of what brought you here to be speaking on the stresses of law, and your experiences with law school?
Yeah, thank you. So my perspective, I would actually say begins before I got into teaching. I used to be a prosecutor here in Albany. I used to work for the DA's office for Albany County, and did that for almost 10 years. And that's an incredibly intense job. It's not a job with a lot of work life balance. At least it wasn't when I did it. I don't think too much has changed. And it's not unheard of that you're working 80-hour work weeks. It feels like sometimes, it's an incredible task that prosecutors take on, incredible responsibility. And it also has a lot of practical challenges that I'm not sure everyone is familiar with. I've had instances where I would get an email from uh, the court telling on a Friday afternoon, telling me that I have a case that's been moved up for trial the following Monday, and I gotta get all my witnesses in order. I gotta make, in addition to a closing and an opening, and kind of dip into, in my mind at least, dip into all of the issues in the case, and really adjust your frame of reference. And obviously, when that happens, my weekend is gone too, right? So, my I have a former colleague. We figured it out once. We would get paid for we. It's a salaried position, but the salary position covered 35-hour work weeks. And my colleague and I, who had a night court at the time, figured it out, and we worked so late at our night court, we hit 35 hours by Wednesday night. And there's, at least this particular office, there was no comp time or overtime, or there was vacation, and you could take time off, but and obviously you'd have to get your cases covered, and you can't ask someone to just take over a trial for you. And it's incredibly challenging. I can't tell you how many of my weekends, how many of my nights were spent prepping cases for trial, or a hearing or something like that that I might have. And as I kind of grew up through the office, I was very fortunate when I was there. And I say fortunate, I don't know, it might be unfortunate depending on how you look at it, but it was just me. I don't have kids. I didn't have a spouse or anyone to really provide for. So I was just constantly working around my schedule. So that's what I mean when I say I was fortunate. And I, used to talk with some of the more senior prosecutors in the office. Like, it's very challenging when your kids have soccer games and you have family events to attend, to fit the personal life into the professional life, and maintain your professional job successfully. Very challenging. It's a juggling, essentially. And so that's probably my first experience of how demanding the law can be. I'll talk a little bit about my law school experience, but how demanding the law can be. And I would say I probably was not taking care of myself. It's a lot of late nights, 5 hours of sleep some nights, sometimes less. And I wasn't taking care of myself to get the job done. And so I've grown a lot since then. Now that I'm in teaching, I see students kind of put themselves through the ringer, doing all of the same things that I was doing, for to try and do well in their studies at school. And so I'm constantly seeing that. And I teach. So right now I teach evidence, criminal law. I've taught those courses for the past 3 years. Next year, I'm going to be teaching we call it Intro to Lawyering. It's like a legal research and writing, a skills-based foundational course for first year students. I'm going to be teaching that next year. So I'm going to be working a lot more closely with first year students. I only see first year students now in their second semester, and because criminal law is a second semester course at Albany Law School. And I still see the challenges and the juggling that a lot of students try and do. So it's not unheard of that I have conversations with students one on one where it's like you gotta take care of yourself. That comes first. I've had students tell me that they don't get any sleep during final exams, and that's not good. I have students that don't take care of their physical health, like they have physical ailments that need to be taken care of, and then they're going untreated because they're worried about falling behind. And so it's a lot of that, trying to give everyone perspective that you're not going to do anyone any good if you're not taking care of yourself. And yeah, so that's kind of my perspective where I'm coming from, and a little bit about my journey along the way.
Yeah, that was great. I love that you kind of gave this perfect example of what I try to convey when Amanda mentioned we do the Bridging the Gap programs. But when I first got into kind of the research, the information about burnout prevention, the hot topic is boundaries. And so some of the examples are simply like, yeah, when it hits 5 o'clock, just simply close your laptop and go home. That's a boundary and that's balance. And then, for the lawyer, that's the exact example you gave, as that was pretty impossible because the court, you can't say no to the court. They're calling you on a Friday. So you can't just say, sorry, my work-life boundary is that I'm going to close my laptop at 5 and call it a day. So lawyers really are expected to kind of have this, I don't want to say this lack of boundaries, because I think that's our goal here, is to figure out how we can have nuanced boundaries in the legal profession to help find that balance. So with that, I'm going to kind of go into our first question here. You mentioned just kind of trying to find balance a little bit, and especially for students, hearing that they're not sleeping is a big concern. We know that not sleeping impacts the body, impacts the mind, especially long term. So, what are some tips you have for students with time management in particular? How can they kind of prep for exams while also taking care of themselves?
Uh, I'm going to answer that. Actually want to circle back to the kind of like what you were talking about, like
Yeah.
we kind of tackle that. And something that I've ultimately found very helpful, and I think it's true even for law students, is resources, network, team, help. Um, like I found that to be very helpful. The office that I used to work at is very hectic and chaotic. When I, became conscious of this, that the attorneys are at risk of burnout, and so that there was a policy change where your trials had two prosecutors on them, so you could balance the workload. And when things got hectic for one, you could really work together and just to get the job done. And I think that's true to some extent in law school. I mean, yeah, everyone's on their own journey, everyone's taking their own exams and things like that. But all law schools have wellness initiatives. All law schools have a point person for like the students, dean of students. And it's important that if people are struggling, that there are shoulders to lean on. There are people who can listen, come up with a plan, help strategize for the student. So even though it might not be like a tag team in that sense, there still is a team mentality that I think helps people navigate the balance when it might not be intuitive or might not feel practical. Now, in terms of management, time management, I have a couple of different things to talk about. I'm not sure exactly which you want of both. So I can speak a little bit about time management going into like the final exam season, and how to manage studying and exam preparation, not sacrificing work that's to be done, as well as taking good care of yourself. So I can talk a little bit about that. I can also talk a little bit about the kind of microscopic or short term time management that occurs during the exam, because I think a lot of students feel time pressure on exams. And so it's almost like these micro stressors that happen when you're in like a 2 hour block or something like that, 3 hour block, sitting down to read something and being so anxious, you got to read it like 4 times to see what you're actually reading. So I think there's a couple of different ways to approach this. If we have time, I'll take a minute.
Yeah, I think we have plenty of time. And I think both of those would be helpful. When I was kind of thinking about what we talked about, I was thinking about way back when I was in undergrad, just everyone, the library, there was nowhere to sit. The library was overflowing with students just studying. And in my head, I was like, what are they doing? Like, I don't even know how to study. So yeah, if you want to talk about kind of that overwhelm of just how to manage the time of studying and preparing.
I think having a plan is critical. I don't think it's like you wake up one day and it's an easy solution. It really is being organized, having a plan. I have so you mentioned the 5 o'clock person who shuts the laptop and does like that. If that works for that person, that's what they need to do. That actually doesn't work for someone like me. I need to I work in like I have long hours, but a lot of breaks scattered in between. So I'm a morning person, but I also have a lot of responsibilities that are at night. So I work in a lot of breaks throughout the day so as not to overexert myself, mentally or even physically. And so I think coming up with a plan is critical. So like Wednesdays, actually, just this semester for me, I have an 8 a.m. class, and then I have a class online that meets from 6 to 9 p.m. and lots of things scattered in between. So I need to build in time to decompress, time to get away. You're actually kind of with me right now at my decompression time. You can see that I'm home. I usually do come home halfway through the day just to kind of decompress, get out of the office, and things. So I think coming up with a plan and a system is key. A technique I learned a long time ago was time blocking. And I don't know if anyone's ever studied time blocking, but you actually you can make use of a digital calendar, a daily planner, whatever it is, but you actually allocate time to do certain tasks in chunks throughout the day. I mean, it's somewhat a seamless addition to everyone's day-to-day lives, because particularly for students, because you have times and days that you have to be in a particular class. So all you're doing is just creating times and days where you're tackling a particular task, and you're doing it on your own, but essentially the system is the same. And I think that is critical. That's really a good first step at managing time. Just getting a little bit of perspective of the tasks before you, what you need to accomplish, and the time within which you need to accomplish it. And for exams in particular, I'm sorry if this is not the answer people want to hear, but it's a long-term process to really prep for exams effectively. There's no trick or secret, as far as I'm aware of kind of checking out or not not absorbing the material throughout a semester or throughout your time as a student, and then just showing up during the exam period and spending a couple of weeks on it and getting over the hump. That usually doesn't serve people well. Studies even show that that doesn't help you with memory retention or information retention, and that's particularly important for what I would say this cohort, for the most part, will be taking our current uniform bar exam. We're in a transitioning period. We're going over to the next gen bar exam, but that's not until July of 28. So we are kind of in this transitioning period, but both exams are going to require a basis of knowledge that largely starts with your first year courses: property, contracts, torts, criminal law, civil procedure. Um, and it's not going to be enough for people to not absorb the material while they're in those classes and just try and get caught up on the back end. So managing that time really starts, I think, at the beginning of the semester, in terms of showing up to class, keeping up with outlines and things like that. And it's baby steps. The semesters fly by, but I think people uh, it- preparing themselves for exams, appreciating, absorbing, understanding the material. It's in little bits, little bit by bit, and I think by having little tasks, modest goals, day to day, really helps prepare people and get people over the finish line, get students over the finish line. When the exam period starts, so it's the typical exam period is about 2-ish weeks and change, 3 weeks, and exams are typically scattered throughout. I know most law schools are pretty good about staggering exams, so that students don't have all of their exams in a 48-hour period. Most schools try and avoid that. It does get tricky though when you're out of your first year program, and you get to pick your courses, so everyone kind of branches off and goes all over the place. So, it's not unheard of once you get out of sight of 1L that you might have exams, so your exams might be in a 72-hour period. And that can be very challenging. Some schools are great about allowing rescheduling and accommodations and things like that. Others, not so much. I've heard a lot of bad stories from some schools. So the idea is you want to figure out what your exam schedule looks like, because that's in the moment, the tasks before you, and figure out how it is you're going to approach them. I tell my students that it's a little challenging, but you want to try and tackle all of your exams, the closer you get to them. So, like, just to give you an example, um, a lot of students will have like their con law exam will be the first exam uh, in the exam period, and then their criminal law exam will be 2 days later. And what a fear that I have with my current cohort and conversations I've been having with some people is, those days leading up to the con law final, no one's thinking about criminal law. It's just con law, it's just con law. And the problem that I worry students might run into is that leaves them with maybe a day or 2 days, depending on what the space is, to try to cram as much as they can from a 3 credit course. I don't think that's wise. I think the planning starts, as soon as you can. Come up with a game plan, set time aside for as much as you can within reason. I mean, I don't know as if it makes sense to begin prepping for your last exam the day before your first exam. Like, I'm somewhat realistic on that, but I don't think cram sessions help anyone. I don't think late night hours help anyone. Um, I can think of one former student in particular who was incredibly bright and an exceptional student, but did poorly on an exam, and the student wanted to review it with me. And I usually ask students when they're unhappy with their performance, or they're surprised by their performance. I'll say, something did something happen? And this student in particular said, yeah, I wasn't sleeping during the exam period, so I just wasn't, I was prepped, and I was spending that time studying, but then when it came to the exam, I wasn't able to comprehend what the questions are, and I had to reread questions. And so it's kind of like your body's like a reservoir. You can only fit so much, your body or your mind, and then it starts to overflow, and you start to lose things that you need to be successful. So coming up with a plan is key. Being organized within your limits. If you're someone who needs to work 9 to 5, so be it. Fit everything within that period. If you're someone who has the stamina where you can like spread things out and maybe take more of the marathon approach than the sprinting approach, because I'm not a sprinter. And fit it in with that, and as well as staggered breaks kind of throughout the day. And you also want to find a good space too to be working. Some people work better with others. Some people work better alone. Some people work well at home. Some people don't work well at home. So you want to think about what's effective for you. And it might actually be helpful for people to do a little bit of research about distracted behavior. There's literature out there about the presence of a cell phone, a mobile device, in a person's space, and the effects that the phone's presence has on a person's productivity, because we're just so tempted to kind of check our phones for emails and text messages and things like that. And that's a real problem, and it's aggravated by our computers now. A lot of our computers are effectively a larger phone, where you can get text messages to your computer. All your email, everything you can do on your phone, you can do on your computer. And so that transition is very tricky, and you got to figure that out. You got to plan for that, because you want to have productive time while you're working. Okay, so that's a little bit about, I would consider that more the macro type of time management, coming up with a plan, sticking to that plan, and knowing what works best for you might not work for everyone else, and just being true to yourself. It might be a little bit of trial and error. Now, the more, what I would consider the micro time management of approaching an exam, so this is more for you're in the exam room, the exam's getting ready to start. You only have 3 hours to complete it. How do you manage that time effectively? I would say that the overall answer is the same. It's a plan and sticking to it, but it does change a little bit. I think students, as best as they're able, should try and learn what the exam parameters are. I don't mean like closed book, open book. I mean, like, is it multiple choice? Is it essay? Is it a combination of different testing modalities? Like, what does the exam look like? Most of your professors are transparent about that. Like, it's going to be X number multiple choice, this number of essays, or this short answer. So ask those questions. And I encourage my students, I would encourage anyone watching, to see if professors will share point breakdowns, like how the exam's weighted. Like, is it 60% of the grade from the essays and 40% from the multiple choice? That's usually how I try and do it. And just see whatever the breakdown is from the professor, see if they'll share that with you, because again, that's information that's helpful in charting a plan. Some professors will even offer suggestions on how much time to spend on each section, and you want to stick to that too. So an example, I was just talking with some of my students in my evidence course, about spending a tremendous amount of time on multiple choice. I gave an evidence midterm that was 10 multiple choice questions worth 2 points apiece, and an essay worth 30 points. And the students, well, one student in particular I was talking to said she spent almost the whole hour on the multiple choice, and only had 10 to 15 minutes to tackle this essay, and ran out of time. And so, it was a lot of, like, you do realize that even if you spend an hour on one multiple choice question, at the end of the day, it's only worth 2 points. At the same time, if you spend, an hour on an essay, it's only worth 30 points. And then you're not devoting the appropriate attention to the rest of the exam. So try and find that balance and divide your time proportionately when you're planning. Kind of know what your plan of attack is when you go in. A lot of professors are great about disseminating exam instructions ahead of time. That helps with time pressure. If you can see what the exam instructions are before the exam starts, that saves you a little bit of time. Also be thinking about what it is you're doing during the exam, and how effective that is in terms of time management. An example, again, that I see a lot in my classes is criminal law in particular is very element based. And I let students use scratch paper, even though the exam's administered on ExamSoft electronically. A lot of students will have scratch paper, they can write things down. And a lot of students who wind up running out of time tell me that they spend a good portion of the beginning of the exam like writing out rules, like battery has these elements, assault has these elements, and then they'll actually hand write them. And I would say, why do you do that? And they say, well, it helps me remember. And I would say, well, you do remember. You remember them to write them down. And so don't doubt yourself. And the reason that's so problematic is because what they write down is usually incorporated into an essay. And so I say you're doing twice the work. And so my suggestion usually is if you insist on writing things down, just type them into the essay box and then edit it a little bit as you go through. That way you're not spending that time wastefully. Um, so at the end of the day, whether it's long term, whether it's short term, I think the biggest trick to time management is coming up with a plan that works best for you and sticking to it, armed with as much information as you can get going into the exam.
Great. Yeah, and I think the micro tips really are a great analogy for how you can look at more long-term solutions, not just with exams and studying, but also in life, just really setting out, clear expectations for yourself, and managing them in a way that, and that's what I do hate about these programs is we can't give a solution. We can't say, here is the solution for time management. It really is figuring out what works for you. We can't just sell a paper planner that's going to be the fix all for everyone. There's no computer software that'll do that. So really just figuring out what works for you. And I think with those with the time management tips and thinking about that was such a great example, the student spending time on the multiple choice versus the essay. And I know there's a lot of tips for multiple choice, trust your first option. That's usually, your first instinct is good. But looking at like essay writing, how do you kind of approach that with confidence and feeling like is there any tips you have for essay writing and then also with issue spotting and just those types of expectations of students is like, how do you know when to call it quits? Like if you are pulling an all-nighter because you want to find the last possible issue, just how can you feel confident that you've done your job and yeah, you're good to go?
Yeah, yeah. So that's a really good question. Circling back to because what you're saying a lot kind of dovetails into what I'm ready to talk about. Wanting like a quick and easy answer. You see so much of that when teaching students. The students want a quick and easy rule. Like, give me the rule. And I think our goal. I don't know if I'm speaking for all those teaching law, but the my goal is like the journey is more important than the destination in my mind. So like how we get there, how we reason to it, is so much more important to achieving understanding of the rule than just be like, here's the black letter law. So what I do a lot of the time when I'm teaching the materials, I do start with black letter law, and then I try to highlight gray matter within what appears to be the black letter law so that we can start to appreciate its meaning. So I kind of approach it backwards from a lot, or at least the reverse from a lot of my faculty colleagues, where they begin with a question and work their way toward the rule of law. I kind of begin with the rule of law and then start to ask a bunch of questions about it because I find that gets people thinking about it a lot more critically. And I say that the same kind of spirit is true about essay writing. I always tell my students that the why is so much more important than the whether. So when I'm talking about the issue, right? The issue is whether, and the answer to that question is not nearly as important as why. So I tell my students, and this is true, I would submit no matter where you are, that the purpose of exams in general, and especially essays, is a testing tool. It's designed, its function is to see how much you, the test taker, knows about a topic, a rule that is being tested. And so I think if you just kind of take a step back, you appreciate it for what it is, that it's literally an assessment tool to see how much you know about something that's being tested. you can start to have a little bit of perspective as to how you approach tackling it. And so, a good rule of thumb that I share with my students when it comes to essay writing is see it as your opportunity to teach me the material. Assume that when I'm reading it, I don't know anything about, a battery or assault. I don't understand specific intent, and then so it's your opportunity to explain it back to me. And if you have that kind of focus with your audience, you'll find yourself explaining a lot more. And the explanation, that's the why as opposed to the whether. The explanation is so integral to me when I'm trying to figure out, is this a test taker who knows the material? Because anyone can recite an issue, a perceived issue and a problem. Anyone really can engage in rote memorization and just regurgitate some set of words that they've crammed in their head. I mean, if you think about people with a theater background, right? It's very easy to do. You just need to find a system to memorize it. But what really demonstrates understanding of the material is the analysis. And so I encourage a lot of Iraq, CREAC, whatever structure you have, it needs to have a section devoted to analyzing fact patterns within the context of a rule of law that you've stated. And that rule of thumb of assume your audience doesn't know much about this topic is a good approach, because it allows you to kind of like flex your muscles and show off. I know what this means. I know personal jurisdiction. I know the elements of contract formation, and articulate it within the context of the fact pattern. Many times when you're doing essay writing, you're going to have a long story and usually multiple questions or issues in that long story. And for the most part, the facts that you're reading about are there for a reason. They're usually not there's not a lot of fluff in essay fact patterns, like superfluous information that you really don't need. I mean, information in essays usually provides you with background information, such as like plaintiff has sued defendant for injuries sustained, blah blah blah. um, and so there is a little bit of that just to provide context and background. But then there's a lot of facts in a fact pattern that are like rule triggering, like the way they're framed, the way they're worded, they like invite an issue. Like the defendant has objected to the report coming into evidence. So that's like a rule triggering type of fact. It's designed to get you to have your ears perk up or your eyes perk up and be like, oh, there might be an issue coming. And then I would say kind of the third category of facts in most essays are the ammunition, the stuff that lawyers can use to make arguments, the stuff that the law students would be using to make arguments when they're writing an essay. And so I think if you are reading fact patterns with that perspective, you're going to be in a good spot in terms of trying to categorize facts. Now, I don't share that with anyone with the idea that it makes essay reading more complicated. But I hope it gives people a little bit of comfort knowing that the facts that you are reading, the stories that you're reading in an essay fact pattern, are usually there for a reason. And many of the facts that you're reading can be used by you in your analysis. Another good rule of thumb that I share with a lot of students is incorporate the word because into your analysis. So a lot of students write in conclusory fashion, like, therefore the evidence is hearsay, or therefore the court has personal jurisdiction. And then they'll conclude and by saying, thus the court should have denied the motion. And all of that is a conclusion. So I always say, if you ever find yourself writing in that type of language, and you have an essay that doesn't at all use the word because, like try to use the word because and then find the facts in the fact pattern that follow the word because. What are the facts in the fact pattern that are leading you to say the things that you're saying, to write the things that you're writing, and then write about those facts, include those facts into your into your essay. So those are kind of some general tips just for like approaching exams and actually reading essays with a little bit of purpose. In terms of knowing, when to move on, knowing once you've done enough, that's always very challenging. It depends on the essays, the questions that you're getting. But generally speaking, if you can say that you've answered the question, every question has like a call to it, a call to question, such as like, did the court rule correctly? Is the defendant liable for breach of contract? What defenses can the defendant raise? So there's usually a call to question, and there's usually multiple ones. So as long as you're answering every call to question with that basic formula, articulating a rule of law, developing the why, and then concluding with the whether, you're going to earn points. That's points can be readily earned on essays for discussing. It's fertile ground for partial credit, unlike multiple choice questions where there usually isn't much opportunity for partial credit. So by discussing and using your tools of persuasion and advocacy and writing really does accrue points. Now, did you ask about issue spotting, or was I just expecting you to ask me about issue spotting?
I threw the phrase in there, but yeah, nothing specific. So feel free to tackle that as well.
Yeah, just really quick, and it kind of is tied to what I've said already a little bit, but um, issue spotting is the one thing I think that it starts way before the exam. You just have to prep yourself in such a way where you can recognize things as you see them. And so that's what I tell my students, like that's what a goalpost should be, is like you need to be able to spot issues. And an example that I give is I tell students to imagine that you're walking down a sidewalk on a city street, and you're approaching an intersection controlled by a red light. And you see the traffic light, you see that the light is red, and there's a car that's approaching you from behind and it's about to pass you, and it's approaching the intersection. And you see that it does not brake, it does not stop, it blows through that intersection against a red light. And almost everyone, when they put themselves there, they're they have alarms going off that, oh no, can't do that, you're not supposed to do that. And that's without any poking or prodding. There's no one asking like what went wrong here. Like when we see something like that out in the wild, we recognize, ooh, that's an issue. And the reason I think we are able to recognize that, even if you're not a driver, like people recognize that. And the reason we're able to recognize it is because that concept is so ingrained into our minds. Like we have lived with it since we were likely children, right? And so that's where the goalpost should be with this material. And it's not baseless. This idea of issue spotting doesn't exist to give students a lot of grief or stress. It exists because if you go on to represent clients, a client might ask you a question about a problem that they are facing, and they may not know what the legal issue is. They may think that there are things going on in their life that are all okay, and then when they tell it to you, you're like, oh no, there's an issue there. So that's the importance of it. And in terms of issue spotting, like any little tricks and things, the content of the essay really matters. Think of the facts, think of why the facts are there, try to spot those things that are rule triggering facts. Usually when someone's objecting to something, usually when a motion is filed, or a judge does something in a fact pattern, that language that surrounds those actions usually is flagging an issue for you, but you got to know the law well enough to be able to recognize it. So yeah, I hope that's helpful there.
No, it absolutely was. And the way you described kind of, you know, going through the essay and pulling out important phrases, important kind of things that are supposed to kind of have your, I guess not your ears, your eyes perked up. Reminds me of almost like navigating an escape room where you're just like everything could be a clue. Not all of these are going to get me out of the room. So I have to figure out, which ones make the most sense. And I am timed, so just kind of figuring out the priorities to show that you know what you're doing. You don't have to get every single piece, but just show that you're answering those questions, that formula, like you described, is great.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, with everything we've been talking about, we talked about time blocking, pulling all-nighters, which we are not recommending. How do you kind of find balance when you're prepping for exams? What guidance would you give for someone who just feels like they absolutely have to stay up all night studying? How do they prioritize that balance?
Yeah, knowing your limits is key. And there are, I think, some things you can do uh, that are that still move the needle forward for you in terms of studying and doing work that might not be as intensive on your mind. Like I used to love taking walks. This was more me during bar prep, but I would take walks and just think about the material. And that's progress. It might not be a question set or an outline or flashcards, but just kind of getting in your own headspace and thinking about the material, thinking of questions to ask yourself. You're getting outdoors, you're getting some fresh air, you're still working with the material, so you're kind of accomplishing both. You don't feel as guilty after when you're done, as opposed to sitting on the couch and watching Netflix or something like that, where it's like you don't get anything done, then you feel terrible afterwards. So I would always try and find those little breaks, to usually be nestled in between moments of productivity, so I could kind of dip in, dip out. And whenever I did something, I didn't want to feel terrible afterwards. I didn't want to have regret afterwards. And so I would always try and do that. A lot of people, it's like, you have your for the those 5 o'clock folks, that's when you decompress, you do whatever you need to do. A lot of times it's like, just unplugging, turning the phone off, going on do not disturb. That is something I do because I go to bed so early. I have my phone automatically going to do not disturb at 9:15 at night, because I'm usually in bed shortly thereafter. And I can't be doing emails or anything after that. So that's kind of like my decompression mode. And I take advantage of that. But you gotta figure out what's best for you. Not all work toward exam prep needs to feel stressful. Um, it's your mind, your brain is like a muscle, and you there are a lot of different exercises you can do for it. It's like if you've ever wanted to get in peak physical condition, think about all of the physical activities you could do. You could go running, you could go walking, you could go kayaking, you could use machines, free weights, play a sport, whatever it might be. The same is true for studying with your brain. There are a lot of different activities you can do. Many are less strenuous than others. So if you're having those rough days but don't want to feel a sense of regret or being not productive, think of other activities you can do where you're still working with the material. When I was studying for the bar, which I think this is all also good for those bar folks on the horizon, I would come up with my own practice questions and having no idea if I knew what I was doing. And then I would like give it to people. Like I would ask people to kind of work through it. And I try and find people who like knew the material. So whether it be a peer, I had a professor that I would bring questions to, like, okay, I think here's my multiple choice question on personal jurisdiction. And in my mind, B is supposed to be the right answer. Is that accurate? And so like that's kind of a fun way to work with the material a little bit, and you still ruminating on it, you're thinking about it, and yeah, some progress without the stress of reading a bunch of stuff or watching a long video or making a ton of flashcards and your hand is hurting because you've been making so many flashcards. So just try to incorporate variety into studying as well as just some of the things you can do to wind down. Especially this time of year, walks are great. I love taking walks and being outdoors. And Yeah, so just find ways where you can continue to work with the material, but also taking good care of yourself.
That's a great advice. And I think really closing with this thought of just prioritizing yourself and knowing that we want you to take care of yourselves. We have an Albany Law professor here saying you should be taking care of yourselves during finals week. I think people look at it, especially when you described, if your exams are scheduled 2 days apart, people will just cram and say, I'll sleep in 2 days. And it's really not, that's not going to be beneficial. As we saw with the student who didn't do well in their exam after not sleeping. Um, we do have about 10 minutes left. So if there's any questions for Professor Wetmore or myself regarding exam prep, NISBA services, the 8 pillars of attorney well-being, please type them in and we can get those answered. I did want to highlight, just as we're talking about balance, some other ways to take care of yourself. So we try and use those 8 pillars when you're feeling lost. Maybe you have been at the library studying for 12 hours and you don't remember, what other parts of you need to prioritize. That's why we use these to say, maybe I do need physical wellness right now. Maybe I do need to go for a walk, those types of things. And then the reason we do, again, categorize them is because there are long-term risks of not prioritizing these things. And when we look at them, maybe on a small level, accruing some late fees on your credit card bill, not focusing when you're studying, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but they start to accumulate and snowball. And so that's why we look at this kind of holistic approach to wellness. And I'm keeping an eye in for questions while I just close this out. So it's not necessarily about knowing what all the signs and symptoms are, just like there isn't a quick fix. So just recognizing what it means for you to be feeling your best, and what does your baseline look like. So especially during exam season, you might start to notice some fluctuations. And so it's good to, just like Michael shared earlier, with prepping for exams starts really early on, so does taking care of yourself. So we really want this strategy long term. And we have a self-assessment if you're feeling really lost. Amanda will be able to provide this slideshow as well as the self-assessment to everyone who attends. And then I just have this visual that kind of encompasses that long-term journey we've been talking about. So the goal really isn't to just get to the top and sit on cloud nine forever. It's to accept that it is a long-term process, and we want to be able to get to a point where we really appreciate the highs when they come. We know what joy looks like. We can experience happiness. And then when we hit, a down point, we're going through negative obstacle in life, we're able to recognize it and bounce back. And our goal really is to bounce back higher each time. Michael, anything you'd like to add? I don't see any questions coming in, but any final thoughts here?
No, no, other than just, there's not an easy quick fix to any of this stuff. It's just more taking care of yourself and over time and yeah.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time. I think I have one more slide here just to let you all know that we really are integrating these things into our NISBA's programming and services. So just some helpful tips. Again, this will be included in your material, but we do have a Tuesday co-working group. That could be helpful while people are studying. It's really a group of lawyers across New York, some out-of-staters too, just on screen, focusing for 2 hours on independent work, and we take a break halfway through just to chat. On Fridays, we have a meditation that's offered by one of our committee members from the Committee on Attorney Wellbeing. And we're also starting a new somatic group, which is emotional freedom techniques, and that'll go on Thursdays throughout the summer. So really, if you have any other requests or ideas from Attorney Wellbeing, you can reach out to myself or Amanda, and we'll get those going. We really want to make the resources for law students available as you prep for exams. But I think that is about it. We have our well-being program. We also have our lawyers assistance program with a confidential hotline. We have services free and available for mental health. If the stressors are feeling like they're too much, please reach out. And I think that will be a wrap up. So thank you once again, Michael. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. So this concludes our program. Thank you once again for your time and attendance. Feel free to sign up for the remainder of the law student events that we have going on. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.